Hi guys, so let's now take a look at Kinked demand curve theory of oligopoly. So when it comes to the Kinked demand curve theory of oligopoly, it helps us to explain price stability within an oligopoly market. Now remember, oligopolies have a handful of firms competing with one another. As they compete with one another, they can make various choices. They can increase output and reduce the price, or they can restrict output and raise the price. Now this Kinked demand curve theory really highlights the decision, the impact of the decision that this is likely to have on the firm and its revenue. Okay, so we see different elasticities in effect taking place on this average revenue curve. Here, the demand curve is highly price sensitive or price elastic, whereas beyond point Q here, we see that it's highly price inelastic. Let's call that Q1. Okay, so we see that it's highly price inelastic. Now, what does this mean for a firm? Well, it means that if they choose to actually restrict output to perhaps this point, let's call that Q2. So by restricting output to Q2, we can see the price would increase a tiny bit, but they'd actually lose out a huge amount of sales and a huge amount of total revenue would be lost for the small area that would be gained there. So there is no incentive to actually consider doing that. So as a right-minded oligopolist will not want to raise the price because other firms will not want to follow them. Okay, now what about if they actually reduce the price? Well, if an oligopolist reduces the price, what impact may this have? Well, we can see that because the curve becomes, the demand curve becomes so much more inelastic, it means that the actual quantity sold only increases a small amount. And the reason for this would be those competitor firms, while they wouldn't follow that price increase, and that would then mean that all of those customers go back to other oligopolies to get their produce. In this case, when you actually reduce the price, the other firms would actually follow suit. In doing so, you can see that output would only increase a tiny proportion there. Okay, so we could reduce the price to this level and we get a very, very small increase in output. Now, because there is this kink in the average revenue curve, it also means, of course, that the marginal revenue for the firm will also have to kink. Okay, so that is an important point to bear in mind, and we see this here. Okay, so there is in effect a discontinuity between our marginal revenue right here. Okay, now that is really just highlighting the fact that marginal revenue at this point will be equal somewhere along here to the marginal cost curve, and therefore oligopolies, we know they want to maximize their profits, so therefore they will produce where MC equals MR, MC equals MR here, so we will have a price outcome of P1 and Q1. Okay, and there is no incentive to deviate away from that position. So this is why this model helps us to explain price stability, but it doesn't consider a couple of important factors here. Firstly, what about non-price competition? Because we know that Apple versus Android phones, Apple phones get the price raised quite significantly year on year, particularly if you look at the iPhone X. So this model clearly does not work in actually explaining what has taken place there perhaps. And will competitors really behave as suggested? So will that really be their behaviour? Okay, you know, there is a deeper question there, and particularly given the fact that no non-price competition is actually considered here. This model just really helps us to understand why prices might be stable overall in a given marketplace. Right, there we go. I hope that was all right. Thanks ever so much. See you.